Former US President Donald Trump has maintained a commanding lead in the crucial early voting state of Iowa in a new poll. Nikki Haley is emerging as one of his closest challengers, sharing second place with Ron DeSantis. Joining us live with more analysis is James Morrow. He's the host of the US Report. James, good to see you. Just remind us why Iowa is so important and why it is so significant that Donald Trump is doing so well there at this early stage.
Well, a few things here. Iowa is the first caucus in the nation, and the Iowa caucus process is really interesting. It's a little bit different to a straight primary. People come together and they meet in different groups, church basements, school halls, things like that, and they caucus and determine where their votes are going to go for the nominee for the Republican and the Democrat. This is going to happen in January 15th. On January 15th, traditionally candidates go, they spend a lot of time tromping through the snow and talking to people in all these different community groups. It's really American democracy in action here. What's interesting here, of course, is number one, that Donald Trump is doing very well there. Now, we knew that he was doing well, but there's a couple of interesting things to note. Number one, he's doing well despite all of his legal troubles, so that is clearly not affecting anybody on the Republican side of the ledger in terms of, where they're going to cast their vote. The other interesting thing, as you say, is that Nikki Haley, after a few strong debate performances, is really emerging as the second favorite here. Now, she's very different from Donald Trump. Her foreign policy is, I think, much more sort of, expansionist, interventionist, that sort of thing. So she appeals to that wing of the party. The other thing to note here, too, is that the Democrats also have this caucus on the 15th, but their results aren't going to be reported until after the South Carolina primary because they want South Carolina to be first in the nation.
So just tell us a bit more about Nikki Haley's platform and what sort of approach have we seen her taking to the quandary, really, that is Donald Trump in terms of how far she's willing to go in terms of attacking him to try and beat him for the nomination?
Yeah, well, I mean, the big area that she has been staking out ground has been on foreign policy. So, she's much more of, some people would say a neocon, I guess you would say, on foreign policy, interventionist when it comes to things like Ukraine. And she's chalked up really big debate performances. That's where I think she has really shined and taken advantage, not just of, Donald Trump, but actually where she's really managed to come around and come into the second place position is by taking advantage of Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, who everybody, myself included, thought was going to be doing far, far better, be a much greater rival to Donald Trump at this stage. But, he has really failed to launch. And it's sort of like he did a great job as governor of Florida, but he somehow managed to not parlay that into a national platform, and Nikki Haley has taken very much advantage of that there as well.
Why not, James? Why isn't Ron DeSantis living up to those early expectations that he might shoot to the head of the pack? Yeah,
look, it's a really interesting question. I think the biggest issue is that he has tried to run for president on a very sort of, I'm the governor of Florida kind of ticket. But, the things that he did as governor, rather than parlaying that into kind of executive level competency to then say, I'm competent to manage the nation, he kept running on things that appealed to his fans, around pandemic management. But of course, nobody wants to talk about or hear about the pandemic anymore. Everyone's just done with that. And then secondly, very much around sort of cultural issues like Disney and wokeness and things like that, which are important things for a lot of conservatives, but they don't play to the national stage because, of course, ultimately the same thing in the U.S. is the same thing as Australia. People are really concerned about cost of living, rising fuel prices, rising energy prices, housing unaffordability, things that Democrats traditionally would have been, speaking to that sort of middle class, working class base on, but they've abandoned them. So Trump comes and he takes those issues, and he really runs with them. And Ron DeSantis never really competed on that ground, which is ultimately where you win, because people don't care as much about whether Disney's gone woke or how you did in the pandemic or even about foreign policy in Ukraine and things like that, because remember, foreign policy doesn't really tend to sway American elections than they do about the real bread and butter stuff. And that's where Trump has the advantage.
And so, James, I know that the election is more than a year away and it is early days in terms of looking at how the polls are tracking. But what are they saying so far about what would happen if we do see a Trump versus Biden rematch?
Yeah, look, that's where it starts to get really interesting because you have to go into the state by state. Now, You've got two wild cards here, though. Everybody says, oh, well, this is all a fait accompli. You're going to have Trump and Biden. Well, maybe, but maybe not, because, Joe Biden, pardon me, he has the whole issue of his competency, his mental fitness, all of this. And, with the world sort of falling to pieces, people are wondering if he's sort of the right guy to be managing this. Now, I have said for months and months now, I actually don't think Joe Biden's going to be the guy on the Democrat ticket. And you could see come August, the superdelegates, who are the people who actually decide who the nominee is at the Democratic convention, do a very carefully stage-managed handover from Biden to somebody else. Because right now, if you vote for Joe Biden, you're voting for Kamala Harris at some point potentially being president in that second term of the administration. A lot of people aren't comfortable with that. Donald Trump, of course, he's got all of his legal woes. And there is always the chance that some prosecutor comes really, really good with something in Florida, in Georgia, somewhere that puts him in the sort of legal jeopardy that might actually not allow him to run, i.e. that he could be jailed. I think that's a remote possibility still, but this is going to be such a strange year. I don't think that you can discount either one of these possibilities. Right now, I think Trump has a slight upper hand over Joe Biden, but of course it has to then come down to which states that he lost in 2020 that he gets back in 2024. And that's going to be the harder mountain for him to climb, even if the national poll has him ahead.
Plenty can happen in a week in politics, let alone a year.
Absolutely.
But it's fun to watch. James Morrow, really appreciate your analysis. Thank you.
Anytime. Thanks.